AITA, for canceling my wedding after finding out my fiancé is still in contact with his ex. I've always prided myself on being someone who trusts easily. It's just part of who I am, I guess. I never really had to question the intentions of the people closest to me, especially my fiancé, Tom. We met about 3 years ago, through mutual friends. At first, everything was easy, comfortable in that way that makes you feel like you've known someone forever, even though you haven't. We clicked instantly, and before long, we were inseparable. In the early months, it felt like a dream. We went on weekend trips, cooked dinners together, stayed up talking about everything and nothing. He was sweet, thoughtful, and completely attentive. His friends loved me, and my family took an immediate liking to him too. We got engaged last summer. The proposal came on a quiet Saturday evening. We were at a restaurant we both loved, sitting at the same table where we had our first date. He pulled out a ring that I swear sparkled like it was made of stardust, and my heart skipped. I said yes, of course. He looked so happy, and I couldn't imagine a life without him. The wedding planning began shortly after. Flights booked, venues booked, dresses picked out, and everything felt like it was falling into place. But looking back now, that's when things started to shift, ever so slightly at first, but enough for me to feel a change. At first, I thought it was just stress. The wedding planning was starting to take a toll on both of us. Tom was more distracted than usual, a little more withdrawn, but I chalked it up to the pressure. I mean, who isn't stressed during wedding prep, right? There were moments when he seemed off, like when we'd be sitting together on the couch, and he'd pull his phone out, suddenly fixated on it, not paying attention to anything I said. And when I'd ask, "Who's texting?" he'd always reply, "Oh, just work stuff." It wasn't the answer that bothered me so much as the way he'd respond, almost a little too quickly, like he was trying to brush it off. I wasn't the type to snoop, and I trusted him, so I pushed those little moments to the back of my mind. Still, there was this nagging feeling deep down. Maybe it's just my intuition, but I couldn't shake the thought that something wasn't quite right. One night, we were talking over dinner, when out of nowhere, Tom mentioned his ex-girlfriend, Mia. They'd dated in college for a few years, and from what I gathered, their breakup had been amicable, nothing dramatic, just two people growing apart. But whenever he spoke about her, I noticed something strange. There was always a hint of nostalgia in his voice. It wasn't just casual mention. He would sometimes speak about her with a certain fondness that didn't seem typical for someone who had been in a long-term relationship with someone else for years. It wasn't a red flag at first, but more of a small flicker in the back of my mind. I brushed it off, told myself I was being paranoid. I'd met Mia a few times before, and she seemed nice enough. No competition there, I thought. She was friendly, respectful, and had clearly moved on from Tom. Still, I found myself Googling her name once or twice just to see what she was up to. I mean, everyone does that, right? It wasn't that I was worried about her per se, but I couldn't help but wonder why she still seemed to linger in his thoughts after all this time. The thought crept into my mind. What if there was something more there than he was letting on? But I'd pushed those doubts aside, convinced I was just being silly. One evening, a couple of weeks before everything exploded, I noticed something odd. Tom had been acting strange all day, distracted, distant, even when we were out for a walk in the park. It wasn't like him. After dinner, we were watching TV in the living room, and he got up to grab a drink from the kitchen, leaving his phone on the couch next to me. For some reason, I found myself staring at it. I couldn't help it. Maybe it was the way he had been acting lately, or maybe it was the way the phone seemed to glow with a new message alert that caught my attention. My fingers itched to pick it up, to just see who was texting him at 9 p.m. on a quiet Thursday night. I didn't. I really didn't. But the temptation was unbearable, and I ended up picking it up. What I saw made my heart stop. It was a message thread between Tom and Mia, not a simple, "Hey, how's it going?" type of text, but a long, detailed exchange. They were planning something. They had made plans to meet up. And I noticed something that cut through my entire being. He'd saved her name under a completely different contact, nothing related to her name at all. It was a nickname that didn't even make sense. My stomach turned as I scrolled through the messages. They'd been talking regularly, not just casually, but about personal stuff. He'd told her things he'd never told me. Things like how stressed he was about the wedding, how he wasn't sure about some of the plans. He had mentioned a few times how he was feeling overwhelmed with his life, how he wasn't sure if he was ready for all of it. And that was when the doubt hit me like a ton of bricks. My mind spiraled into thoughts I never wanted to entertain. Was he questioning our engagement? Was he comparing me to her? Update. The next few days felt like walking through a fog. I couldn't stop thinking about the messages I had seen. The fact that Tom had been talking to Mia behind my back was bad enough, but the secrecy left me paralyzed. Every time I looked at him, I felt a weight pressing down on me, like I was watching a stranger who happened to be wearing the same face. I didn't confront him right away. Part of me was still hoping there was an explanation. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe there was nothing going on. After all, it could just be old friends catching up, right? But the nagging feeling in the back of my mind kept telling me I needed to know more. What was he really saying to her? Why the secrecy? For a few days, I tried to let it go. I didn't ask any questions. I pretended like everything was normal, made dinner, went to work, smiled when I saw him, but inside, my stomach was twisted in knots. Every time he left his phone lying around, I couldn't resist looking at it. I didn't want to, but I couldn't stop myself. I started checking the timestamps on the messages, making sure to note when they were sent, when he was home with me, and when he was with her. It was getting harder to ignore the facts. The messages had been sent at night, around times when we were watching TV together or, sometimes, when he was out running errands alone. And then came the bombshell. It was one of those nights when I was laying in bed, unable to sleep, when I heard the familiar ping of a new message. I grabbed his phone. My heart raced as I opened the conversation thread. There it was, just as I expected, more exchanges with Mia. But this time, I noticed something different. They had made plans to meet up again. This time, it wasn't just casual, "Hey, I'll be in town, want to grab coffee?" This time, the conversation sounded like they were planning something more personal, more intimate. They were talking about going to a concert together, a concert that was weeks away. And Mia had said, "I can't wait to see you, Tom. It's been way too long since we've hung out like this." My hands were shaking as I scrolled. I could feel the heat rising in my face, a mix of anger and disbelief. They had been planning this for weeks, and Tom hadn't mentioned a word of it to me. Not once. He never said, "Hey, I'm meeting up with Mia soon." He never mentioned her in passing like he had with other friends. Nothing. It was like I was living in some sort of alternate reality where I had no idea who this man was anymore. That night, when Tom came back into the room, I was waiting for him. The phone was still in my hand, and I could barely look at him. He sat down next to me, acting casual, but I could feel the tension in the air. I could feel that he knew something was off too. "Hey, what's up?" he asked, like he didn't already know. I didn't answer. I handed him his phone. "You need to explain this," I said, my voice trembling despite my best effort to stay calm. He looked at the screen, and his face went pale. "What? Where did you?" "Don't lie to me, Tom," I interrupted. "What is this? You've been talking to Mia behind my back. You've been planning to meet up with her, and you didn't think I'd find out? What the hell is going on?" He seemed frozen for a moment, staring at the screen, unable to form a coherent response. It wasn't like him to be so silent. Normally, he'd have some excuse ready, some way to explain things away, but this time, he was silent. And that was worse than anything. "I can explain," he finally muttered, but his voice sounded hollow, distant. He didn't sound like the Tom I knew. He sounded like someone who was caught, guilty, trying to scramble for words that would fix everything. But how could he fix this? "You've been talking to her this whole time," I said, tears starting to form in my eyes. "And you didn't think to tell me? You didn't think to mention her at all, even though we're getting married in a few months." He ran a hand through his hair, looking like he was about to say something, but I couldn't listen to him anymore. "You're planning to meet her, Tom. You're going to see her. You've been hiding this from me for weeks." My voice was shaking with emotion now, my anger bubbling to the surface. He looked down at his lap, his face contorted in frustration, guilt, and something else I couldn't quite place. "I'm sorry, okay?" he muttered. I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't think it would be a big deal. But it was a big deal. It was huge. You didn't think it would be a big deal? I repeated, my voice rising. You're still in contact with your ex, Tom, and you've been hiding it from me. How is that not a big deal? He paused, rubbing his temples like he was trying to process everything at once. Finally, he sighed deeply, and his shoulders slumped. Look, I know I messed up. I didn't want to hurt you, but I didn't know how to handle everything. Mia and I have history, and… Stop, I cut him off. You've been talking to her behind my back. And you never told me about any of it. If this is what you wanted, why are we even doing this? Why are we getting married? He was silent for a long moment, his eyes darting nervously around the room. I'm sorry, he repeated. But I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose us. It felt like everything was spinning. My world was crashing down around me, and all he could say was, I'm sorry. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. The room felt like it was closing in on me, the walls inching closer as the weight of everything hit all at once. The betrayal was raw, deep, and undeniable. I stood there, heart pounding, trembling with fury and heartbreak, as Tom's voice, weak and tentative, tried to explain. I can explain, he said quietly, eyes flickering with guilt. It's not what you think. But I couldn't listen. I couldn't let him finish. Years of trust, hope, and love shattered in an instant. How could he think I'd just accept this? No, I snapped, voice sharp as broken glass. Don't even start. You've been lying to me for months, hiding things, sneaking around, talking to her behind my back while we're supposed to be building a life together. He looked stunned, like a kid caught stealing cookies. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. I felt my breath catch, tears burning at the edges of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not yet. Not while I still had the strength to stand tall. How long? I demanded. How long have you been doing this? How long were you planning to keep it from me? His silence was all the answer I needed. I took a step closer, the fire inside me growing hotter. You don't get to say you love me when you're still wrapped up with her. You don't get to promise a future when you're living a lie right now. He reached for me, desperation in his eyes. Please. I love you. I never meant to hurt you. I pulled back sharply. Love? No. This isn't love. This is selfishness and betrayal. The room was thick with tension, the air crackling like a storm about to break. Tom's eyes darted around the room as if searching for an escape route. His hands trembled slightly, and his usually confident posture seemed to crumble under the weight of my fury. I'm not asking for forgiveness right now, he said, voice barely above a whisper. But please try to understand. It wasn't like I planned to hurt you. I never stopped loving you. I was just confused. Confused? I scoffed bitterly, crossing my arms. Confused is what you are now, standing there, caught in your own web of lies. You didn't come to me with your doubts or fears. You hid them. You talked to her in secret, made plans with her, and lied to my face. I could see his jaw tighten. It wasn't like that. Mia and we had a history. It was complicated, but it's in the past. I thought I was done with her. I thought I could move on. Clearly you didn't. My voice cracked as the tears I'd been holding back began to spill over. You didn't move on, Tom. You just hid her from me. I felt anger and hurt collide inside me, mixing into a painful swirl that made it hard to breathe. This wasn't just about the messages or the secret meetings. It was about trust that I thought we'd built over years, now shattered like glass. You don't get to act like this is some small mistake, I said, my voice rising. You lied. You broke everything. Tom's shoulders slumped, defeat washing over him like a wave. I'm sorry, he whispered. I don't expect you to understand. I messed up. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, each beat a reminder that this was real, that this was happening. The life we'd planned, the wedding, the future, it all felt like a lie. The room exploded into chaos as the tension boiled over. Accusations and regrets spilled out in a torrent of raw emotion. "How could you do this to me?" I yelled. "How could you even think I'd forgive you? I didn't mean for it to happen this way." Tom shouted back. "I was scared. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to lose you." "Well, you lost me anyway," I cried. "You lost us." His eyes were desperate, searching mine for a glimmer of mercy. But I was numb. The betrayal was too deep. "You made your choice," I said coldly. "You chose her over me." "That's not true," he pleaded. "You have to believe me." "No," I said, voice steady now. "I don't. I'm done." I grabbed my jacket from the back of the chair and headed for the door. My heart was breaking, but my resolve was firm. "I'm leaving," I said, voice barely above a whisper. "I can't do this anymore." Tom reached for me one last time, but I stepped back, the distance between us growing wider with every step. The door shut behind me with a finality that echoed in the silence. The air outside was cool against my skin, but inside, I felt a fire burning, a mixture of pain, anger, and newfound strength. The plans, the promises, the dreams, they all lay in ruins behind that closed door. But so did the pain of pretending everything was okay. As I walked away from the life I thought I knew, I realized that sometimes the hardest thing to do is choose yourself. The first few days after I left Tom felt like I was caught in a fog I couldn't shake. The apartment I'd lived in for years suddenly felt like a stranger's place, empty, cold, and too quiet. I wasn't sure what hit me harder, the silence or the fact that I was alone now without him. I woke up one morning on my friend's couch, the sunlight slipping through the blinds and hitting my face. It should have felt peaceful, but instead, I just felt hollow. The ache in my chest was so raw it felt like my ribs were bruised. I kept thinking, what now? I'd spent so long imagining a future with him, marriage, maybe kids, late-night talks, the comfort of someone who was supposed to be my home. And now, that future was gone. I didn't have a grand plan for how to fix myself or move on. Honestly, it felt impossible. So I told myself I'd just focus on getting through one day at a time. One small step. No pressure. The first real step was going outside. I hadn't realized how little I'd left the house over the past months, too wrapped up in our problems, in trying to pretend everything was okay. I went to the park near my friend's place and just walked. The air was crisp, a little chilly but fresh. I watched kids chasing each other, old couples sitting on benches, people walking their dogs. Everyone seemed so normal. For the first time, I realized the world didn't stop just because my heart was breaking. I also started writing again. Not for anyone else, not to make sense of things, just to get the thoughts out before they swallowed me whole. I wrote everything down, the anger, the betrayal, the nights I cried into my pillow. I wrote letters to Tom I never intended to send. Sometimes I begged him for answers. Other times I just told him I was done. It helped, kind of like breathing through the pain. It was around this time that Tom began texting me again. At first, it was a single message. "I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." I stared at it for what felt like forever, my heart pounding. Part of me wanted to respond, to hear his voice, to try to understand. But I didn't. Then came another message. "Can we please talk?" I debated ignoring it. I really did. But eventually I texted back. "Fine. One coffee. No promises." I arrived early, heart pounding like it was trying to escape my chest. The cafe was a small, quiet place with soft lighting and a handful of scattered tables. It was the kind of spot where you could hide in a corner and pretend the world hadn't shattered beneath your feet. I picked a table by the window, sat down, and folded my hands tightly in my lap. My fingers trembled, betraying the calm I tried to fake. I watched the door anxiously, every customer that walked in making me jump a little. Then he came in. Tom looked like a shadow of the man I once knew. His clothes hung loosely on him, his shoulders slumped as if carrying a weight too heavy to bear. His eyes scanned the room and finally locked onto mine. That look, the mixture of regret, sadness, and uncertainty, cut me deeper than I expected. He approached the table slowly, like he wasn't sure he'd be welcomed. When he sat down across from me, I noticed the space between us, the invisible wall built from lies, betrayal, and heartbreak. It felt vast and unbridgeable. Neither of us spoke immediately. The hum of the cafe faded into the background as my mind raced through 1,000 thoughts. What was I even doing here? Why had I agreed to meet him? I wanted answers. I wanted to scream, to cry, to demand everything from him. But all I could do was sit, my throat tight and dry. After what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke, his voice low and hesitant. "I'm sorry," he said, "for everything." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a man who had broken the person he claimed to love. The words felt hollow, like a bandage slapped over a wound that was still bleeding. "Why?" I asked, the words sharp and raw. "Why did you lie to me? Why pretend everything was fine when you weren't?" He swallowed hard, avoiding my gaze. "I was scared," he admitted quietly. "I didn't want to lose you." I shook my head, disbelief and hurt swirling inside me. "But you lost me anyway," I said, my voice trembling. "You lost my trust." There was a long silence. The tension was suffocating, thick with everything that had gone unsaid. I wanted to tell him all the things that had hurt me. The nights I cried alone, the endless questions with no answers, the way I'd felt invisible even when we were together. But the words stuck in my throat. Finally, I said, "I don't think I can forgive you."
Not now.
Not ever. His shoulders sagged, defeat settling into his posture. "I understand," he said quietly. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed to say I'm sorry." I looked away, tears pricking my eyes despite myself. Part of me wanted to reach out, to hold on to the man I once loved, but fear held me back. The fear of being broken again was stronger than any flicker of hope. "I need to go," I said softly, standing up. My legs felt weak, but I forced myself to move. He didn't try to stop me. As I walked away, the door closing behind me, I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. The chapter wasn't closed, not fully, but I knew I was done with this conversation. Done with the possibility of reconciliation. I was finally starting to put myself first. Update. I realized I'd been isolating myself, cutting off people who cared because I thought I had to handle everything alone. But loneliness wasn't helping. It was suffocating. So I called my best friend, Mara. She answered on the first ring, her voice warm and familiar. "I'm here," she said simply. We talked for hours. About everything and nothing. About the past and the uncertain future. Just hearing her laugh again was like a small balm on my cracked heart. I decided to see a therapist. I'd resisted before, afraid to dig into the pain, afraid to admit how broken I felt. But sitting in that quiet room, sharing the raw, messy pieces of my story, I felt a strange relief. Not immediate, not like magic, but like the beginning of stitches knitting a wound closed. It was hard. Some days I wanted to run away from the pain. But I stayed. Because if I wanted to heal, I had to face it. Healing wasn't linear. Some days I'd feel like I was taking giant steps forward. Other days, I'd slip back into the old darkness, the familiar ache. But slowly, I started to see flickers of hope, moments where I felt lighter, more like myself again. I was learning to trust myself, to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could be whole again.